Ever since I was a youngster on the internet, one of the biggest urban legends or creepypastas in the Pokemon community definitely was the Lavender Town Syndrome. And surely, truthfully, all these years later, there's nothing real behind any of these stories and rumors, right? Right? Well, actually, there were some really interesting things that we did learn about the development behind the original Lavender Town, which we'll talk about in this video, and at the very least, it's just interesting. But maybe to get a better understanding of the context of Lavender Town and this creepypasta story that has run wild on the internet for over a decade, let's look into all of the rumors and theories about one of the most talked about towns in all of Pokemon. Now, Pokemon Red and Green originally released in Japan in 1996 and would later release in the US with Pokemon Red and Blue versions. Now, the localized Red and Blue versions were slightly different and enhanced versions of the original Japanese Red and Green versions, and just in general, because the fact that there were two different versions, there were a ton of rumors and theories that ran rampant on playgrounds across the globe. And rumors to playground students can literally just spread like wildfire, like some of the biggest rumors in the Pokemon franchise to date, like Mew is hidden under the truck over by the St. Anne. There's a secret way to actually join Team Rocket, or you can battle Professor Oak at the end of the game. Well, that last one might actually have some truth to it, but that's a different point we can get into later. And some of these definitely had more staying power than others, and of course, with just in general, the creepiness that was integrated into the town of Lavender Town in the original Pokemon games, maybe some things got taken a little bit out of hand, leading us to where we are now. So the story goes like this. Now, allegedly, the Lavender Town Syndrome was a peak in suicides and illnesses in players between the ages of 7 and 12, shortly after the release of Pokemon Red and Green in Japan. And the rumor is that these suicides and illnesses were caused after the children playing the game reached Lavender Town, where the music had these extremely high frequencies, and studies quote-unquote, showed that only children and young teens can actually hear those frequencies since their ears are most sensitive. Blah, blah, blah. The story goes on to say at least 200 players supposedly committed suicide, and many more developed illnesses and afflictions. It even goes into specifics to the preferred way of self-oofing, and then those who did not act on those complained about severe headaches after listening to Lavender Town's theme. It then went on to say that after the incident, the programmers fixed the Lavender Town's theme from the early Pokemon Red and Green version before the newer Pokemon Blue version was released in Japan and Pokemon Red and Blue were released in the US. Now, I can get behind some creepy Pokemon fan theories. Blue's Raticate died? Definitely. This, I can pretty confidently say this is very clearly not a true thing. First of all, hundreds of deaths. This would have been reported by a reputable outlet immediately when this story started to develop. Remember when the anime caused a bunch of seizures to viewers in Japan? There were no deaths, but hundreds were hospitalized, and that had a ton of press coverage. But actual deaths caused by a video game, especially in a time where everyone was trying to demonize games out there, there's nothing other than wiki articles. Now, the reason why so many people obviously believed this rumor most likely can be attributed to the fact that a lot of us were just naive kids when this story was popularized. And as new fans jump into the Pokemon series, of course, they're going to see something Lavender Town Syndrome related at some point or another. Also, tie that to the fact that there is some truthful situations. It adds this extra padding to the evidence, but it's not actually anything that can be proven directly. For instance, it is shown that there are frequencies that only younger people can hear, and this is something that's utilized in a lot of situations. For instance, I remember going to the mall back in the day when those were still kind of a thing, and the area where all the jewelry stores were would play this high-pitched sound that my parents could not hear, but my brother and I could hear. It was an attempt to kind of dissuade children from hanging out in that area because of the annoying sound. And this is just one example. There's a ton of examples out there of high-frequency sounds that are used to dissuade people from crowding in areas. Also, if you look at the story, one could relate it to the very disturbing fact that suicide is an alarming and serious issue amongst the youth in Japan. And of course, mental health is a serious issue everywhere, and we'll put a link to some resources down in the description below, just in case any of you ever need help. Just know there is access to free help out there. But in general, by painting this creepypasta story around some little things that could be tied in to real world examples definitely added this sense of truthfulness to the overall story. And then the fact that the Lavender Town music is pretty creepy in general, for everyone who likely played Pokemon as a kid, they probably remember this sense of uneasiness when going through that area. But let's put the rumors to rest right away. When I was a kid, I remember reading this, being intrigued by it. I remember there was some video of a spectrograph that apparently had secret messages in it, which obviously was just faked by some fan. But I, being naive, thought I would take the investigation to myself and loaded up the song on our old family Windows XP Dell computer. And I listened to the original Red and Green Lavender Town music. I was shooketh, but it didn't have any effect. And there's no effect now. The song itself was just a bit eerie. And maybe they changed the pitch or whatever just down a bit because it's just really annoying. But actually, as it turns out, the song itself did not have any changes between Pokemon Red and Green and then Pokemon Red and Blue. This is just a fake rumor that had been started years ago, and a lot of people just take it as fact, but upon further research, there's actually no differences between the tracks. Now, of course, don't get me wrong, Lavender Town is one of the coolest and most atmospheric locations in any old school Game Boy game. Little things like the White Hand dialogue that was super creepy, and the whole Pokemon Tower stuff, and the whole Cubone storyline, that stuff's spooky, and running into ghosts and you don't know that you're supposed to get the Silph-Scope, that can be scary as a kid. And there's definitely an appreciation for Lavender Town as a whole. One of the coolest things they did actually was back when Pokemon X and Y was to release, and they did that short mini-series following Red. They even hid a secret hand on his shoulder in one frame, and it's not there in another frame. Like, the spookiness was real. Now, it is, of course, interesting just to see the conspiracy theories around Lavender Town, like people saying that it was in collaboration with the Japanese government and was trying to cause harm or something. The rabbit hole goes pretty deep, but it's all just surface level speculation on something that's not even true. Now, Junichi Masuda has been working alongside Pokemon since the very beginning. He was the composer in Pokemon Red and Green and worked on the regular development team for the game, and has pretty much been involved in every main Pokemon game since its very beginning. Now, all the way back in 2007, Masuda actually had an interview posted on the Game Freak website where he talked about his original discovery of classical music back when he was in high school and some of the works that he was inspired by. And just from reading through this, you can see that he obviously has familiarity with a lot of classical music compositions, and one of the biggest key things about the Lavender Town theme that makes it so eerie and creepy is definitely the fact that in music theory, this song typically falls into the atonal category. In general, with music, you hear a lot of things like a tonal center or a key, for instance, and music that lacks a center tone and utilizes a chromatic scale, which means it includes sharps and flats freely, typically fall into this atonal type of music. And this music began to come into prominence in the late 19th and 20th centuries and was controversial for just how the music sounded so different from the classical type of music that has typically been associated with composers during that time. Masuda was quoted in that interview from earlier to say that Igor Stravinsky was one of his big influences in music composition. And Stravinsky has a very interesting background because he actually is known for composing one of the most popular songs that have atonal features. In 1913, Igor Stravinsky wrote The Rite of Spring, which was an orchestral ballet, which utilized this atonalic theme and had a lot of experimental types of dissonance and stress. Here's a very short excerpt just to get an idea of what it sounded like. Now, when this ballet actually debuted, since there had never been anything like this before, audiences were actually disgusted and ended up walking out of the theater. Some reports even suggesting that a straight-up riot was formed after listening to the ballet, just because of the, quote, avant-garde nature of the music and choreography together. It would actually take 10 years before this music would end up being widely accepted and critically approved. We think that's something really interesting just because the fact that there was such a response to just a musical piece, utilizing atonality, which is also something used in the Lavender Town music, which also had a pretty big response to it. But as it turns out, there's actually other real-world inspirations behind Lavender Town when it comes to the original Pokemon games. The Pokemon Tower was actually a feature of the game that was planned in to be a part of the game some way or another, and while it may seem creepy that there's all of these tombstones everywhere, or these tombs that are just lining through the floors of the Pokemon Tower, it's actually not that too different from how a lot of above ground cemeteries look in Japan. They're actually very commonplace. Also, in the English versions of the game, we know this town as Lavender Town, as most towns in the original Pokemon game take some sort of inspiration by something color related. But in the Japanese translation, this town is actually known as Shion Town. In Japan, the flower Aster tataricus is known as Shion and has a lavender color to it. And the flower's meaning in Hanakotoba, which is the Japanese special language of flowers, the Shion flower represents the phrase "I won't forget you," which in turn is very fitting for a in-game town that is based around the idea of paying respect and memoriam for fallen Pokemon. The Pokemon Tower itself was actually originally supposed to be this multi-level dungeon back before the game really turned into the turn-based RPG that it is. But it always was intended to be a tomb, which later developed into the Lavender Town Pokemon Tower where Pokemon like Ghastly reside. And in general, Lavender Town always served as this unsettling location in the Pokemon universe. For instance, in the anime, one of the first times Ash ever dies in the Pokemon series, and there's many times he does end up dying, Ash and Pikachu's spirits end up getting taken by a Gengar, Ghastly, and Haunter while they're in a Pokemon Tower. It's definitely one of the spookiest episodes in the early anime. And in the Pokemon manga, it's even creepier. When Red goes to Lavender Town, he ends up seeing hundreds of graves and a zombie Golduck along with some other zombies attack, which is super terrifying. But when you look at the whole scale of the entire Pokemon franchise, you may start to realize that in general, Lavender Town was only the very beginning of some of the spooky elements included in Pokemon games. If just some music and text could get such a reaction, it became clear that down the road, just to have one more chapter in a player's adventure, incorporating some type of creepy area into a game would be hugely popular. We see some really interesting things in Diamond and Pearl, for example, and while second generation did completely rework Lavender Town to be a more upbeat and uplifting area, and similarly in the second gen remakes, a special house named the Soul House would remain to honor the deceased Pokemon that once were laid rest in that town. But hey, if you enjoyed this video, maybe check out some of the other videos we've done on Pokemon on this channel. Here are some of the thumbnails that may look appealing to you, and also make sure you're subscribed with notifications on so you don't miss our next Pokemon video. We'll see you all next time.